Designers working on a new project in Agile, they have to start pulling in their development right off the bat. So rather than going and sitting off in a corner, designing out some solution, and then handing off a piece of paper to the developer so they can build it, instead they're having to sit with the developer on day one and kind of walk through the process. Why am I talking about this? Well, because there's a missing party here, especially today, if we want to make things secure from the beginning, and that's involved security from the beginning. There's a lot of our solutions, especially if you're an international company, that there's a whole mountain of security concerns that you need to start taking into consideration when you're first doing your initial design. That includes even just simply sketching, thinking through the features that you're going to have, that your end users are going to use. All of this stuff is impacted by security, global privacy, and so on. And so we've got to really kind of train ourselves, and as security professionals, prepare yourselves to start being pulled into these development conversations a lot sooner in the process than you probably are today. How many people feel like they are part of those design conversations on day one? So I see 2 hands, 3 hands. A lot of people aren't. A lot of the times we do have that scenario where security gets pulled in kind of last minute and says, hey, sign off on this so I can go and sell it. So there's a really good presentation out there by Jared Spool that talks about designing without a designer. So if I were to do a quick survey here, how many of you guys have regular access to interaction designers at any given moment? Like you can call your interaction designer right now and say, hey, come and help me. I see 1, and I know yours. So a lot of the reality is that a lot of us are having to make these design decisions without the input of a designer. And similarly, designers are making security decisions without input from a security system. And so we need to start figuring out how can we build a bridge between these 2 disciplines. And to do that, we're going to need a common language. My laptop is trying to connect to the Wi-Fi. And so I'm going to throw out a couple terms. Some of these are going to be super obvious. So like risk. I've heard risk mentioned several times here. Why am I defining risk for you? Well, what a lot of people haven't realized is that I did the same presentation for a group of interaction designers. None of them had ever thought about applying risk to their design before. None of them had thought through when they were designing a workflow. So you have a role called the interaction designer, whose whole job is to look at designing a process from beginning to end and all the different interactions that happen between that. They don't think about things like risk. They're thinking about how can I make this thing easy to use? How can I make this as painless as possible? And so they need that help. And so they need to understand risk. So I've been going around trying to help give some various definitions for risk. You guys already know what it is. But designers are making a series of design decisions around the concepts of risk. And they're introducing risk without even realizing it or thinking about it. And I want to transition to talk about security questions for a little bit. I thought it would be fun, especially in a room full of people like you guys, to pull up my security questions from my own personal bank account. So I figured, why not? So these are all questions. I'm sure nobody can probably read them because it's super tiny text. But I wanted to kind of quickly poke fun at some of the security questions that I'm assuming a designer or developer sat down, threw together, and put out there on the page without really considering like the impacts of this, right? And so quickly we can start picking apart how easy these security questions are to parse through. So like, for example, this one was the name of your favorite teacher or professor. You can look at my Facebook profile and see I went to K-State. You can look at my friends list and you can see that I have 1 K-State professor I'm friends with. So there you go. It's pretty easy. There's like no hacking involved, just a quick like Facebook search. I need to find a better example for this one because, so who here knows what Untapped is? So Untapped is essentially Foursquare for beer. So you can check into all of these craft beers, and by throwing this slide up there, I'm admitting my fondness for drinking beer, and having 1,600 is probably not a number I should be bragging about publicly, but just ignore that for now. So up here, what is the name of your favorite restaurant? My Untapped public profile, so you can actually go to this right now, go to untapped.com/Gustitus, which is my handle, and you can go through and look and see what my top rated restaurant is, which is the Foundry. I've been there 25 times, the next highest is 5. So clearly I like to go to the Foundry. And then of course the last one is, in what stage you meet your spouse, significant other. So my Twitter handle, which is in this really tiny gray font right here that nobody can probably read, it says @Gustitus. Follow me if you want. But you can see here that I live in Kansas City. You can go to, again, my public Instagram profile, my girlfriend's name. You can find us in several pictures. We're super cute. Look at us. Her name is Casey Romance. And so these are design decisions that happened on a major bank, one of the U.S. largest bank chains, and it's just that's how they're protecting their accounts through the security questions. I mean, there's more in there, of course, obviously. Getting through the security question, you still have to get through the email. There's some steps, but still, you get the kind of the idea I'm trying to get at. And there's rules around security questions, like hard to guess. Easy to remember, doesn't change over time, but I mean, as we've kind of shown with social media, kind of defunct anymore. It's actually what I think was it NIST guidelines now are kind of pushing people away from security questions as a whole. I see a couple of heads nodding, so I know I'm not making that up. So, it's actually the point now, if you look at sites like Google, they just completely abandoned security questions. But that's a whole lot of points of failure that, you know, whoever was designing this UI, whoever was building that page, wasn't thinking about. So I want to talk about multi-factor authentication for a little bit. And there are design considerations around multi-factor authentication that a lot of people probably aren't aware of. So everybody here knows what a multi-factor authentication is. A thing you know, a thing you have, a thing you are. See, pretty basic. But there's multi-factor usability too. And there's been a really good white paper that was put out there that talked about the usability and the business impact of some of the different forms of multi-factor authentication. So, for example, one of these tokens, not picking on RSA, it could be anybody, but essentially, what these are, for all intents and purposes, what should be a pretty usable thing. It just gives you a number, you type it in, you're good to go. But what they found is, when they were doing this usability study, is that productivity from associates that were implemented these would drop dramatically at home. Because people would leave these in their desk. They wouldn't take care of them like they should. They weren't carrying them all the time. And so if they were in a role that they would work in the office and they'd work at home, all of a sudden their impact on their productivity at home had dropped by a significant percentage. Because they weren't, because of the, again, the usability considerations around carrying around tokens. So it's a thing to kind of keep in mind. SMS, there's all kinds of problems with SMS. We're not going to get into the technical problems with SMS, but from a usable problem with SMS. One of the things they found when they were talking about SMS when it came to like online shopping is that, okay, so we're going to send them an SMS code before they can log in so they can make a purchase online. Well, the problem they hit is that sometimes those delays would be like 10 minutes waiting for this SMS token to kind of come through, and users that wanted to spend $5 would lose patience. And they say, you know what, I'm not going to buy this. I'm waiting for this token for so long, I'll go buy it somewhere else. And that's a loss of sales because of the usability issues with SMS. And then there's hard tokens where they're built into your laptop. That's another form. This one is problematic just today in that we're entering this kind of bring your own device mentality with a lot of corporations where they're trying to push people, or not really push people, but give people more options. So I'm working on my laptop. I also have an iPad that I can work on when I'm running around whatever clients that I'm at. I have my phone, I'm doing work on that. And all of a sudden you become this maintenance nightmare if you want to manage all these different tokens or try and gatekeep what people can or can't use on all these different devices. So again, we're looking at one right now where it's like more of a soft token solution where instead of doing SMS, we just send you digitally a code to your phone. But then we have to make assumptions that people have phones. There's all of these kind of make or break decisions for all the different forms of multi-factor. And so you need to think about your environment, and if you want to push out a multi-factor authentication solution, what potential impacts to the business could that have because of the usability around it? The other thing I try to do when I talk to interaction designers is I try to teach them to treat authentication. Authentication is simply the act of locking, and treat that as a completely separate thing from authentication, or authorization. A lot of people seem to conflate the two, where they think authentication and authorization are the exact same thing. So when you're working with these people that are building these forms and they want to like gate all these privileges, they need to realize that they need to treat these as two separate actions rather than having them all be combined. And I have an example, but at this room, I think everybody here knows what authorization is. So next I want to switch to globalization and privacy. This has been a big one that we've been kind of fighting with at my company, especially over the last couple of years. As we've moved more into the global market, we start looking at ways that we can, figuring out what features we need to start gating off depending on what territory that we're in. So I'll give you an example. As you can see, there's all kinds of different rule sets depending on where you're at. Each one of these countries will have their own list of data privacy rules. So I'll give you an example. Who here knows about the EU cookie law? I saw one person, yay, one cookie enthusiast. The EU cookie law essentially states that if you're going to place a cookie on an end user's device, that you need to be able to tell them what that is, what kind of data you're storing, and be transparent about what its purpose is, so that they can make educated decisions on whether or not they're going to allow you to put cookies on their laptop. Another one is so session recording, and I'm going to get into, I'll talk about PAM a little bit later, but so like anything to session recording, if you're in Germany, for example, you need to ask their permission before you can actually record their session. It's actually technically against the law to record them without their consent when they're at their job. There's all kinds of rules when you start pushing out some of these solutions in some of these other territories. One would be, I remember when we first started moving into Germany, we had like a really big office kind of up there. One of the things that we kind of learned pretty quickly is like sharing personal information of a German associate is a pretty hot topic. You need to be able to ask their permission. So in Exchange, you know how Exchange will show you a little picture of the person that sent you an email if they work at the same company as you do? We had to turn all that off for everybody in Germany because we had to respect their privacy. And there's all kinds of resources out there to tell you about some of the different rules in some of the different territories. This one I've used a couple times, more just kind of try and get like a quick temperature of, okay, we're setting up a new solution in this territory. What's the data privacy rules look like? What are the security concerns? There's encryption requirements. If you're storing up like PII or PHI, you need to know what all those different rules are when you're gathering the requirements. And again, this is kind of like one of those situations where designers and security have to meet, because you need to have your security requirements and you need to be able to satisfy all those before you can even push in those territories. So I'm going to talk a lot about security stuff, which you guys know quite a bit about. So we need to start putting all this stuff together, and we need to start bridging that gap. So if we want to start working more with these people about these other disciplines, how do we do that? How do we build that bridge? First is share your process. A lot of times people have incredibly insightful reasons for wanting a team to do a specific thing. So for example, let's say you want to tell a designer, hey, you shouldn't have security questions as your method to recover your account, right? And so they'll say, well, how come? And so you give them the answer, and you share the process with which you used to get there. Similarly, if an interaction designer is working with you and saying, hey, I need to make a form here, and I need to hide this name, and I can't use the color red for their name, and you ask why. And they'll say, well, because in China, red means a totally different thing or indicator than it does here in the US, and red no longer means, hey, this is bad, it means actually good luck over there. So sharing your process helps build that level of trust between the various disciplines. Understanding the limitations of the other disciplines is also incredibly helpful. So one of the things that's helped me quite a bit in this regard is, I'll give you an example. So there's a thing called responsive web design. I'm going to go down a minor tangent here, in which you can build a page once and it works on all kinds of different screen sizes. And I was shuffling around all the different things on the page, putting them in different orders. And my developer is saying, hey, you can't do that. Every time you do that, we have to use a bunch of JavaScript to try and get to organize and get it to flex the way you want. Instead, you should use natural web conditions to get them to stay in the proper order. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I didn't realize that. And so it gave me the ability to, from then on, make smarter decisions. In the world of security, I'm going to pick on, so session recording again. I thought when we first started pushing out some of these solutions that would do session recording, that it was totally okay to force an associate into it. It was then when I got educated from a security, he was a compliance officer, that we had to ask their permission, that it gave me the education, it gave me the knowledge so that going forward, I didn't have to keep asking them. And I built that understanding. And then building those relationships. And this is probably the most basic one, but one of the most important ones. And this is something as simple as just going and sitting down and eating lunch with these people. So when you see this development team that you've never really get a chance to work with, go down and sit down and have lunch. Ask about how their weekend was. Ask how their kids are doing. You know, build that rapport so that when you have times when you have to have those hard conversations, and you need to push back on each other, you have that mutual understanding and that mutual respect. So I'm going to talk about a success story with a little bit of failure in there. So PAM, we rolled out PAM solutions. Does everybody here know what PAM is? So PAM is privileged access management. It's essentially a way to gate access to certain resources. So it could be maybe a back-end node. And then if that person wants to go and access that resource, they have to go through your PAM solution. It could be like, imagine like a portal, or it could be a server that you SSH to that then puts you on another server, all kinds of different flavors of PAM. And the very first time that we tried to stand up PAM, we took a if you build it, they will come approach. We said, hey, we're going to stand this thing up, and people will just have to use it because, you know, we work here and we're security, and we say they have to do it. But what we found is that pushing something like this across like a really large corporation took a Herculean amount of strength that, quite frankly, we didn't have the clout to do. And so we had really, really low adoption, and it failed, and people were mad at us when we did make it use it because we were making their jobs harder. And like, okay, well, let's take a step back. This first push of PAM did not go over very well. So let's reapproach this and let's apply some of these usability concepts that we have. So I said, okay, I'll run with this. So the first thing I did was I observed my users, which doesn't mean going and talking to like the head of like our remote hosting organization and saying, hey, how many people, what time do they work, and what things do they access. It was sitting down and watching them do their work, understanding the different workflows that they had. And sometimes it was really painful. Like a lot of our people, they have to do work at 2 a.m. because it's the time that the systems were the least busy. And I was like, you know what, I'll get up at 2 a.m. and I'm going to sit there, I'm going to watch you do your work, or I'll SSH and do like a screen share from home. But I learned a whole lot. I learned that I made a ton of assumptions in the first push of PAM that were completely incorrect. I learned that, like for example, I assumed that every time one of our engineers wanted to go and log into a node, they'd go and they'd log into their node, they'd do their work, and then they'd log off. What I found is, actually it's way more complicated than that. They'd go log into a node, and then they'd go log into several other nodes in one quick session because they only had an hour to get a whole lot of work done. If they went over this hour, then all of a sudden we were up for penalties from our clients because we didn't get our work done fast enough. And so there was a time constraint, and there was a lot of rapid hopping around. And it gave me a whole lot of visibility into workflows that I was completely oblivious to. Next is crafting personas. So personas is typically a thing that a lot of interaction designers do. If you don't have access to an interaction designer, it's still a valuable exercise to go through and create these. And what these are they're essentially like make-believe people that you get from interviewing all the different users at your company. So we'll go through and we'll interview all of our system engineers, and I'll make system engineer Bob. And I'll say he works this time, he uses these tools, he logs in at this time, give him a little kind of back flavor, and then I keep that document as a constant reference point so that as we do more projects, I can say, what is the system engineer doing today? Oh yeah, that's right, we have our persona that we built, system engineer Bob, that we can constantly go and reference. There's a really good book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum by Alan Cooper. So Alan Cooper, he used to work at Microsoft, he was like the father of VB back in the day, and now he has his own business doing like interaction design consultant work. But he was one of the ones that really first kind of piloted out the use of personas as a way to better understand your end users. And then the third one was integrate into your users' workflows. So integrating into your users' workflow means a completely different approach than that if you build it, they will come technique that we used the first time we used PAM. It meant going and figuring out, since we understood those workflows, and figuring out how we could insert our tools into their existing workflows and cause the least amount of disruption. One of the things that happens is anytime you make any kind of change to a person's workflow, that increases complexity. It means that they have to go and relearn something. It means they have to go and change the way that they do things like they are doing today. And it's possible to figure out the best way to minimally disrupt whatever their current workflow is, which is what we ended up doing with PAM. So what we decided for ourselves was we chose a solution that was really like SSH command line tool friendly. So instead of saying, hey, everybody has to go to this portal, go and use this other tool, you can use all your existing SSH tools. If you use RailTS or whatever, keep using it. You just got to change your string. And they loved it. They loved it because they stopped having to look up passwords. They loved it because they wanted those recordings because they could go back and see, hey, I made a mistake, what did I go do? And they can go check it. And it was the first time that when the executive of our RHO organization went to go talk to the cabinet about a security project that we pushed out, which would be the PAM rollout, that he said, hey, normally when we do a new security project, it's painful, people don't like it, it makes it more complicated. But in this case, like, I'm happy, my associates are happy, they want to use it. They were begging us to roll it out faster, so they wanted to use it more. And it was because that we had followed these 3 rules. We figured out a way to roll out PAM that would minimally disrupt their process. It would make their job actually easier because they stopped having to look things up. And it gave them more data that they could reference later on. And I'm going to kind of close out with a quick quote tied back to the Yahoo example. The paranoids, the internal name for Yahoo's security team, often clash with other parts of the business over security costs. And I want to close out with the concept of pushing empathy. So when your designers are out there, one of the big things that they try and focus on is having empathy for their end users so that they can try and make things as easy for them as they possibly can. But what there really needs to be more of is empathy for your coworkers, empathy for your developers, empathy for your security professionals, and understanding that a lot of these constraints that we're feeling, they're feeling too. I know every single one of my security teams feels like if they have more man hours, if they have more money, if they had a large budget, they can accomplish so much more. And every other team that they're working with is feeling those exact same constraints. And so it's important that as we kind of work together, that we maintain that level of empathy so that we can maintain those relationships and we can start bridging the gap between these two disciplines. We can be more successful with our projects as a whole. And that's all I got.
Thanks for that, Glenn.
You got a couple t-shirts.
Oh yeah, that's right. I should probably not do that. I'll knock
It sounded dangerous.
the light down.